Hey everyone, so this function is going to be deep map, and it's going to take a Python list and mutate all of the elements, including the elements of sublists, to be the result of calling the function fn on each of the elements. And one thing we do want to note that is like you should always make sure in every single problem that you see is whether we want to mutate the list or not. So in the case of this problem, it like specifically says note that the function does not return the mutated list. And you can also see if like we mutate the list in the case of like doc tests like these. So in the case of this one, we assign L to a list, and then we call this function, and then we don't assign it back to L. So L hasn't changed in terms of like variable assignment, and then we call L again, and we notice L has changed. So that like immediately tells us that we want to mutate the list. But if we did something like x equals whatever this is, and then we did like x right here, then we wouldn't want to mutate the list. It would be returning a new one. But this function, like because of this, we want to mutate the list, and let's think about how we want to go about this. So if we had the list like 1, 2, 3, like one way, and like function is going to be square. Like the way we would go about this is we would go like this list of 0 is going to be like fn of list of 0, because we're changing the 0th element to be whatever this mapping is. So it's going to apply fn on that element, and it's going to reassign that element to the new value. And so this is going to mutate the list, and this like kind of gets what we want. But we want to think again, because it's not as simple as a list with like numbers in each of them. What we want to take a look at specifically is this example right here. So in this, why won't my pen work? Okay, so in this list, what we want to note is that there's another list inside of it. And let's think about when we go through like each of the elements. So we're going to go like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, blah, blah, blah. And then we're going to hit the list. And what does it mean when we say that element is going to be equivalent to fn of like 3, 4, 5? Well, what happens here is going to error, because like you can't square a list. And so what we actually want to do is we want to take each of the elements here, and we want to turn them into like 9, 16, 25. But calling fn on the list won't do anything. So let's think about what we can use. Well, we know that deep map mult will take a list and mutate it so that each of the elements are like going to be like mapped to that number, mapped to whatever number they are, and it's going to take care of nested lists as well. And that's what we assume it to be. And so the idea here is that we want to call deep map mult on this list if it is a list. And if it's a number, we don't want to do that. Or like if it's a string or anything but a list, we don't want to make another call to deep map mult. Because what's going to happen is we're going to call deep map mult on this, and then since it's a recursive call, it's going to turn the 3 into the 9, 4 into 16, and 5 into 25, and we can like keep going on our merry way and move on to the 6 and all of that. And you can also imagine that this will work for like any list that we have of nested lists. So if we had like maybe like 100 of these brackets, what would happen is we would have a recursive call on this element, so like -1 bracket, and a recursive call on that, because it's still a list, all the way down to the 0. And then once you get to the 0th element, we would apply fn on that and mutate it. So if we had like the function +1, this would become 1. And so as we can see here, it's going to work for any amount of nested lists. And when we have this idea of like it's going to work for any amount of nested lists, or like any amount of blank, that gives us the idea of like recursion. So let's go into the function a bit. I'm going to erase this just so we have space. And so we have this idea that we're going to change each element. So that tells us, let's do a for loop. So for I in range list, and this is going to go like 0, 1, 2, blah, 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 all the way to length of list -1, which are all the indices that we want. And what we want to do is that we want this idea of like assigning that element of the list to a new element. So like in the case of a non-list, we want to do fn a list of I, and that's going to make our change. But we need to split it into two cases. One if it's a list, one if it's not a list. And so we're going to use the type function. And I believe it's going to be type of list is equal to list. I think that's the right notation for it. And we're going to put that in if statement. So we're going to check if this is a list. That element is a list. Oh, sorry. We want to check if that element of the list is a list. So if type of the ith element of list is a list, then we want to call deep map mult on it, because that's going to mutate the inner parts of that element. So we're going to call deep map mult mutate. Actually, it's mut, not mult. Fn, and then that element of the list. And it's going to go inside and mutate everything. And one thing to note, which is typical of mutating problems, is that we're not going to have an assignment statement here, because deep map mult is going to mutate it directly, and we're not going to have to take the return value or anything, because we're not going to get like a list object back. And as like if we know right here, does not return the mutated list object. And so now we took care of a case which it is a list, and what if it isn't? Well, then it's much easier to do, because all we have to do is apply fn on that and change the list's element. And yeah, so what's going to happen if we have like the list 1, 2, so this is like the doc test at the top. What's going to happen is we're going to go, our lambda is going to be the square function, so x times x, so fn equals square. And what's going to happen is we're going to go through each element of the list on the outside. So 1 becomes 1, 2 becomes 4. And then we see this list. And then since it's a list, we're going to call deep map mult on it. And it's going to go inside another recursive call. And we're going to change the 3 to a 9. And it sees another list, so we're going to call deep map mult on that one. And it's going to turn it into 16 after going through all the elements. And then this is 25. And it's going to exit that to the main loop, and then we get to 36. And the end result is going to be that right there. And yeah, so that is deep map mult. And make sure to let me know if you have any questions. And yeah.